They thought breaking a man meant breaking his dog. They mocked him, hurt his loyal canine, and laughed, certain no one would ever know. But what they didn't see was the soldier watching in silence, gathering proof with every heartbeat. He wasn't fueled by rage, he was guided by purpose. And when the truth finally came to light, justice hit harder than any command ever could. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story moves your heart, please subscribe for more stories of faith, loyalty, and redemption. The wind over Iron Peak carried a sharp edge, whispering through the pine trees that clung to the ridges like old soldiers refusing to surrender. Snow still lingered on the ground, despite the early spring, crusted and pale beneath the morning sun. Beyond the frozen training field, the Iron Peak Tactical Center stood like a fortress of steel and stone-cold, utilitarian and proud. Its walls bore the faint echoes of men and dogs who had once trained there under the watchful eye of Captain Ray Ward. But now, the place felt different, stripped of the quiet dignity it once held. Ethan Ward stood at the gate, his breath forming small clouds in the thin mountain air. He was 32, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face shaped by years of conflict and loss. His skin was sun-worn, his jaw angular, marked by faint scars that hinted at both discipline and defiance. His dark brown hair, trimmed short, framed eyes of gray-blue steel eyes that had seen enough of war to recognize a different kind of battlefield here. He carried himself with that calm, unhurried grace that came from living on the edge too long. A man who had nothing to prove, yet everything to protect. Beside him sat Blitz, a 4-year-old German Shepherd Malinois hybrid, with a coat of dark sable and amber eyes so sharp they seemed almost human. The dog's body was lean, every muscle defined by purpose rather than force. There was intelligence behind his gaze, the kind that came not from obedience, but from understanding. Blitz was quiet, motionless even, his breath barely visible in the cold, the kind of stillness that only came from absolute trust. As Ethan took his first step inside the compound, a memory slipped into his mind, like a shadow the day his father first brought him here, long before the gray had crept into Ray Ward's beard. "Remember this, Ethan," his father had said, his voice like the crackle of an old radio. "You don't train a dog to obey. You teach him to believe." That was the creed of Silent Light, the philosophy Ray had developed decades ago. It was simple and profound. No shouting, no pain, no dominance, just empathy, rhythm, and respect. But as Ethan walked deeper into the facility, he could feel that philosophy had long since been buried under concrete and protocol. The air no longer smelled of trust. It smelled of diesel, sweat, and fear. From across the yard came the harsh bark of a man's voice. "Sit down, damn it." Sergeant Cole Danner appeared from behind a row of kennels, his silhouette sharp against the sunlight. Danner was in his late 40s, thick-necked, built like a wall of sinew and arrogance. His face was square, his skin weathered to a leathery brown from too many years in desert sun. A jagged scar ran from his temple to the corner of his mouth, a souvenir from a roadside explosion in Helmand that had taken 2 of his men. Since then, discipline had turned into obsession, and leadership into control. He wore his authority like armor. The thick black beard that covered his jaw was perfectly trimmed, the kind of grooming that spoke of someone who needed to control everything, even his imperfections. When he walked, his boots struck the concrete with mechanical precision. His eyes, a cold hazel, scanned Ethan like a man measuring a threat. "So you're the prodigal son," Danner said, voice low and gravelly. "Ward's boy." Ethan nodded once, his tone calm but resolute. "Ethan Ward, reporting for assignment, Sergeant." Danner's lip curled. "I know who you are. I trained under your old man back before he turned soft with all that Silent Light nonsense. Let's see if you're as gentle as he was." The insult didn't hit Ethan like Danner hoped it would. Instead, he just looked at Blitz, who stood at attention beside him, silent and watchful. The dog's ears flicked once, his tail still. Ethan didn't need words to communicate. A faint nod was enough. Blitz sat down quietly, his gaze locked on Danner with a quiet defiance that mirrored his handler's. A younger soldier approached from behind Danner, a lean, sharp-faced corporal named Rix. His hair was buzzed too close, his movements twitchy, the kind of man who laughed too loud when his superior laughed, and vanished when things got hard. "That your mutt?" he asked, smirking. Ethan looked at him evenly. "That's my partner." Rix rolled his eyes. "Whatever helps you sleep, Ward." Danner gave a short laugh. "You'll learn, son. Out here, these dogs are tools, nothing more. You break them, you shape them, they serve. That's how it works." Ethan's jaw tightened, but his voice remained even. "With respect, Sergeant, a tool doesn't drag you out of a burning Humvee. A partner does." The yard fell silent for a moment. Even the wind seemed to pause. Danner's hazel eyes darkened, the muscles in his jaw working. "Watch that tone, Ward. You might have had a famous daddy, but you're on my ground now." "I understand, sir," Ethan replied. He didn't flinch. His calmness was not submission, it was strategy. Danner turned sharply, barking orders at the handlers nearby. The sharp whistle of a choke chain cracked the air, followed by the yelp of a terrified Malinois. Ethan's hand clenched reflexively. Blitz shifted, a low rumble building in his throat, barely audible. Ethan placed a hand on the dog's neck, feeling the tension ripple through the muscles beneath the fur. "Easy, boy," he whispered, his voice like steady earth. When Danner left, the compound seemed to exhale. A few handlers stole glances at Ethan, curiosity mingled with pity. One of them, a veterinary officer named Dr. Nora Patel, approached. She was in her mid-30s, with olive skin and dark hair tied back in a practical braid. Her brown eyes were observant, soft, yet weighted by quiet fatigue. "You must be Ward," she said. "Your father used to bring Blitz's line here for trials. You look like him." Ethan offered a faint smile. "I hope that's a compliment." "It is," Nora said, though her tone carried sadness. "He believed in kindness. That doesn't last long here anymore." As she turned back to her clinic, Ethan watched her go. There was a melancholy grace in her walk, the kind of person who kept caring even when it hurt to do so. He respected that. Later that afternoon, Ethan was assigned quarters near the North Ridge, a small barrack room with one steel cot and a cracked window that overlooked the valley. He set down his duffel and removed a framed photograph from it. His father stood in the picture, one arm around a younger Ethan, both smiling, Blitz's predecessor sitting between them. The edges were frayed, the glass scratched. Ethan placed it on the desk, next to Blitz's tag, and a folded patch bearing the words "Silent Light Division." He sat on the bed, staring at the frozen trees beyond the window. His mind was a storm of contrast, memories of his father's laughter and the metallic echo of Danner's barked orders. He had seen brutality in war, but this quiet corruption of purpose felt heavier. Blitz rested his head on Ethan's knee, amber eyes looking up as if reading his thoughts. Ethan stroked the dog's neck slowly. "We'll fix this," he murmured. Not with noise, with light. Outside, the wind carried the scent of snow and steel. The mountains loomed like silent judges, watching as a legacy returned to reclaim its meaning. Ethan leaned back, the photo glinting faintly in the dusk light. His father's words echoed once more in his memory. "You don't lead with fear, son. You lead with silence, and the world will listen." And as the night crept down the slopes of Iron Peak, Ethan Ward knew that the battle for that silence had only just begun. The dawn at Iron Peak was a strange kind of quiet, the kind that came before conflict. Frost still clung to the rails of the training yard, turning every metallic edge into a blade of light beneath the rising sun. The air smelled of cold diesel and wet earth. Ethan Ward stood beside Blitz at the starting line, gloved hands resting loosely at his sides. Around him, a dozen other handlers and their dogs waited for the signal of the first trial of the season, the detection and response drill. A test meant to measure precision, discipline, and handler control. To most, it was routine. To Sergeant Cole Danner, it was a chance to humiliate the newcomer who carried the ghost of a legend in his blood. Danner stood on the observation deck, arms crossed, his broad frame casting a shadow that stretched down the dirt path like a warning. His voice cut through the air, low and rough. "You all know the rules. 6 scent markers, each buried, masked, or hidden. Miss one, and you're out. Break. Formation. And you're done. We'll see if Ward's miracles can keep up with men." The smirk that followed was razor thin. The first 3 handlers went one by one. Dogs barked, scratched, and lunged, eager but unfocused. The crowd of trainees clapped politely at each success, though none of the performances were flawless. When Ethan's turn came, even the wind seemed to pause. "Ward, you and your mud are up," Danner barked. Ethan gave a single nod, unclipping Blitz's leash. The German Shepherd Malinois hybrid lowered his head, muscles taut beneath his sleek sable coat. His eyes, amber, intelligent, and steady, never left Ethan's face. There was no command spoken, no gesture beyond a small movement of Ethan's hand. In an instant, Blitz began to move methodical, silent, tracing invisible scent lines through the air. He located the first marker near a crate of used ammo casings, sitting back silently with pinpoint focus. The second and third came faster. One, hidden under a rusted pipe, another buried near an old sandbag wall. Each time, Ethan's only acknowledgement was a quiet, "Good." The spectators had stopped whispering now. Even the usual noise of barking dogs had faded into a kind of reverent stillness. When Blitz found the final 2 cents, one lodged beneath a broken cinder block, the last high on the rim of an old drum, he did so without hesitation, sitting in the cold mud, calm and proud. 6 for 6. Perfect. For a brief moment, the world was still. Then, slow and deliberate, someone clapped. It was Captain Rowe, the senior officer overseeing evaluation, an older man in his late 50s, built like a brick wall, but with eyes that carried kindness behind their lines of age. His voice carried warmth and authority. "That," Rowe said, "is control through trust, not fear." The applause grew hesitant, fragmented, as Danner's jaw flexed. His scar twitched. He didn't clap. Instead, he turned to his assistant, Rix, who stood by the control board, a clipboard in hand. "Note the time," Danner said flatly, "and cut it by 15 seconds for lack of leash control." He let the animal take initiative. Rix hesitated, the pencil in his hand trembling slightly. "But sir, the rules—" "Do it," Danner snapped, his tone slicing the air. From the corner of his vision, Ethan saw the exchange but said nothing. He didn't need to. He simply placed a gloved hand on Blitz's neck. The dog looked up at him, panting softly, tongue lolling. There was no need for reassurance. Blitz knew what silence meant. It was trust. Later, in the mess hall, whispers followed Ethan, like smoke. The word Ward carried history. Some said he'd make Iron Peak proud again. Others muttered that he was too soft, too idealistic. Danner sat at the far table, eating in brooding silence, while Rix leaned beside him, trying too hard to fill the quiet. "You saw their faces, Sarge." The old man actually smiled. "You can't let him make you look bad again." Danner said nothing at first. His fork scraped the plate, his knuckles white. Finally, he looked up, eyes like frostbite. "You don't get it, Rix. His father humiliated me once. 15 years ago, Ray Ward told me I didn't understand leadership, that I was a soldier who only knew how to bark. Now his boy walks in here, calm as his old man, and makes me look like a fool in front of my own unit." He paused, a slow, venomous grin spreading across his face. "No, I'm not letting that happen again." That afternoon, new assignments were pinned on the board outside the office. Ethan scanned the list quietly. Next to his name, the words were clear. Kennel Maintenance, 05, 00, 07, 00. It was the lowest of tasks, hosing runs, scrubbing waste, cleaning drains. The rest of the handlers got field drills or tracking duty. Ethan stood there for a moment, then smiled faintly. Blitz wagged his tail once, unaware of the insult. At dawn the next day, Ethan was already knee-deep in icy water, rinsing kennels while his breath formed fog in the cold. His hands were raw, his back stiff, but his movements were deliberate, never hurried. When Rix passed by holding a hot coffee, he stopped to grin. Didn't think the Great Ward would be scrubbing cages. Guess that silent bond doesn't keep your boots dry. Ethan looked up briefly. Discipline doesn't mind dirt. Rix frowned, thrown off by the calmness. You think you're better than the rest of us? No, Ethan said simply. I just think better. He turned back to his work, leaving Rix bristling. By midday, word had spread that Ethan was also reassigned to night sentry rotations, the kind that left little room for sleep. When Danner passed by, inspecting his work, his boots splashing through puddles, he stopped. You still here? Ethan straightened. Yes, sir. Good. Keep it that way. Maybe you'll learn what real endurance looks like. Ethan held his gaze for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Endurance isn't about how long you stand, Sergeant. It's about how long you stay silent. The sentence hung in the air like frost. Danner's face hardened, but he walked away. That evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains, Ethan found himself alone in the training yard. Blitz trotted beside him, ears perked. The compound was silent except for the distant hum of the generator. Ethan sat on a low wall, taking a slow breath. The world was cold, but his mind burned steady. He's not our enemy, Ethan said softly, though he didn't believe it. Blitz tilted his head, then leaned into his leg, a silent anchor in the storm. From one of the upper windows, a faint light flickered the security control room. Inside, a young technician named Noah Green watched the camera feeds. A thin man in his 20s with freckles across pale skin and nervous eyes that always seemed to avoid contact. He adjusted his glasses and leaned closer to the screen, showing the yard. Ethan and Blitz, framed by the fading light, looked like statues carved out of discipline itself. Noah didn't know much about soldiers, but he could tell the new guy didn't belong to Danner's kind, and that was dangerous. As night fell, the yard was swallowed by darkness. Ethan walked back toward the kennels, his boots crunching softly on gravel. Behind him, the flag above the tower swayed in the cold wind, red and white stripes illuminated by the pale beam of the floodlight. He glanced once at the mountains, their outlines sharp against the moonlight. Somewhere in that silence, Ethan knew the real fight had begun, not one of strength, but of patience. Danner's envy was no longer a spark. It was a fire waiting for wind. Night draped itself over Iron Peak like a curtain of steel-gray velvet, soft yet suffocating. The floodlights outside the training yard cast thin white beams through the fog, painting long, trembling shadows across the wet concrete. Inside the dim barracks, Ethan Ward sat at his small desk, the single lamp flickering weakly over the pages of his worn, leather-bound notebook, the Ward Journal. His handwriting was sharp and deliberate, every line neat, every detail exact. He logged every cruelty he witnessed, the rough yank of a choke chain, the muffled yelp of a terrified dog, the names of handlers too afraid to speak. Between the cold ink and the soft scratching of the pen, his silence spoke louder than any argument could. He paused, glancing to the corner where Blitz slept, curled on his blanket, his breathing steady and rhythmic. The dog's flank rose and fell with quiet grace, one ear twitching occasionally, at distant noises, a gate creak, a boot step, the howl of the mountain wind. Ethan closed the notebook and leaned back in his chair, exhaustion tracing lines under his eyes. He'd been on double shifts all week. Danner's harassment had grown subtle, but relentless. Every inconvenience, late roster changes, missing supplies, surprise inspections carried the same cold signature. It wasn't about discipline anymore, it was control through humiliation. The mess hall was still open when Ethan finally decided to eat. The clock above the door ticked past 21:30 as he stepped inside. The fluorescent lights buzzed, the smell of burned coffee and reheated stew heavy in the air. The tables were half empty, voices low. A few handlers glanced up as Ethan entered, then quickly looked away. Everyone had learned that acknowledgement could become guilt by association under Danner's command. Ethan ignored the stares, took a tray, and stood in line behind a broad man with a tattoo of a snake on his neck, Corporal Brent Halley. Halley was a recent transfer from Fort Ridge, mid-30s, muscles carved by years of manual labor and aggression. His face bore a permanent smirk that hid insecurity, the kind that made him seek approval from men like Danner. Halley turned slightly, his eyes flicking up and down Ethan's clean uniform. "Ward," he drawled, voice thick with sarcasm. "Didn't think you'd still be standing after this week. Danner's really got you earning your keep." Ethan offered a calm nod. "Hard work. Never killed anyone." Halley grinned. "No, but it sure makes the rest of us look bad." He took his tray and walked off, joining Ricks and two others at a table near the back. Ethan sat alone, taking small, deliberate bites of his food. Across the hall, Danner was laughing that sharp, barking laugh that didn't sound like joy, only dominance. It happened fast. A hand, Ricks's, accidentally, bumped Ethan's shoulder as he passed behind him, tipping a cup of steaming coffee across his back. The liquid scalded through the thin fabric, but Ethan didn't move. For one long second, silence swallowed the room. Even Danner stopped laughing. Everyone watched to see if the son of Captain Ray Ward would finally explode. Ethan stood slowly. The coffee dripped down his sleeve, a dark stain spreading across the tan uniform. His jaw tightened, but his expression remained composed. Without a word, he took a napkin from the table and began wiping the spill, movements slow, precise. Ricks froze, unsure whether to laugh or retreat. Danner leaned back in his chair, his smirk faltering. The stillness became unbearable. Ethan placed the soiled napkin on his tray, lifted his cup, and refilled it at the dispenser. He turned to Ricks. "You missed a spot." His tone was soft, almost polite, but it carried a gravity that froze the room. Then, calm as a man finishing breakfast, he sat down and continued eating. When he left the hall, a quiet unease remained. For the first time, the handlers saw something Danner didn't, a strength that couldn't be broken because it didn't need to fight back. Outside, the cold air hit Ethan's face like glass. Blitz padded beside him, alert. He reached down, brushing his hand through the dog's fur. "We don't fight noise with noise, boy," he murmured. Blitz wagged his tail once, pressing closer to his leg. From the second floor of the admin building, behind a narrow window, Captain Rowe had been watching the scene unfold through the glass. He was a man who understood power and restraint. He'd seen soldiers lose themselves in pride, seen good men burn out because they confused fury with strength. Rowe adjusted his glasses and made a quiet note in his own ledger. Ward. Control unmatched. The next morning came gray and biting. Snowflakes drifted lazily across the yard. Ethan's muscles ached from the cold and from the 2 hours of sleep he'd managed. As he scrubbed down kennels, the rhythmic hiss of water from the hose filled the silence. He heard footsteps crunching gravel behind him and turned to see Lieutenant Mara Voss, the logistics officer, standing a few feet away. She was tall and lean, her uniform immaculate, a streak of silver hair cutting through otherwise dark curls. Her eyes were sharp but not unkind green, with flecks of gray, like moss under frost. "Sergeant Ward," she said evenly, "I've reviewed your maintenance logs. You're thorough, almost too thorough." Ethan straightened. "Just doing my job, ma'am. That's what worries me," she replied. "Most men stop caring after the second punishment rotation. You don't. Why?" Ethan's lips curved faintly. "Because if I stop caring, then he wins." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Be careful. Men like Danner don't break rules, they bend them until others snap first." Her tone carried something like respect, but also warning. "You've made him look weak. He won't forgive that." When she left, Ethan returned to his work, the hose water swirling down the drain like melted silver. He didn't need her warning. He already knew Danner's kind men who thrived on chaos until silence exposed their weakness. That night, as he wrote in the ward journal, he detailed the incident in the mess hall, noting each witness, the time, the temperature of the spilled coffee, even the shade of Danner's reaction. "He fears quiet," Ethan wrote. "Silence is the mirror he cannot stand to face." Blitz shifted on his blanket, lifting his head as if sensing Ethan's focus. The lamplight caught the dog's eyes gold and steady, like embers refusing to die. Ethan smiled faintly. "You and I, partner," he whispered. "We don't bark. We endure." Beyond the window, the wind rose again, rattling the glass. Somewhere in the distance, a single howl echoed from the training range, not fear, but defiance. And Ethan, hearing it, knew he was not alone. The air above Iron Peak was heavy that night, thick with the smoke of burning charcoal and the faint echo of drunken laughter. A row of yellow lights strung between the old hangar doors flickered against the darkness, casting swaying shadows across the muddy yard. The occasion, a unit birthday celebration, as Sergeant Danner had called it, was nothing more than an excuse for the handlers to drink under his approval. Ethan Ward stood apart from the crowd, his breath visible in the cold, the sharp scent of whiskey and grilled meat clinging to the air. Blitz sat at his side, calm and alert, amber eyes glinting in the dim light. Danner, in his usual stance of arrogance, occupied the center of attention near the fire pit. The heat cast a ruddy hue over his thick, scarred face, and his laughter rolled out like thunder. Rix hovered near him, a lean shadow with a grin too wide, his cheeks already flushed from alcohol. Around them gathered several lower-ranked handlers, eager to laugh at whatever Danner said, though their laughter carried the tremor of obligation. "Ward," Danner's voice barked across the yard. "You still on shift?" Ethan turned calmly. "Yes, sir. Scheduled to check the ammunition storage before midnight." "Perfect," Danner replied, lips curling into that familiar smirk. "Make sure the ghosts of old Iron Peak don't steal our bullets." Laughter erupted around him. Ethan gave a polite nod, unfazed. He knew what the mockery meant. A dismissal, a way to remove him from view. He clipped Blitz's leash to a post near the kennel wall, crouching to meet the dog's eyes. "Stay," he whispered softly. Blitz whined once but obeyed, lying down, his tail curled close. As Ethan disappeared into the darkness beyond the hangar lights, Rix watched him go, his grin sharpening. "You really gonna let him walk around here like some saint, Sarge?" Danner's eyes narrowed. "Not tonight." Inside the security office, Noah Green sat slouched at his desk, the glow from the monitors illuminating his pale, freckled face. His uniform jacket was too big for his wiry frame. His fingers, ink-stained from tinkering with wires, moved restlessly over the keyboard. He was young, 21 at most, a man who'd joined Iron Peak out of necessity, not ambition. The other soldiers mocked his quiet voice and anxious eyes, but Noah saw everything that passed through the camera feeds. He adjusted his glasses, one cracked lens catching the flicker of light from the monitor. On one screen, the party unfolded. On another, the kennel's rows of fenced cages under a single harsh lamp. Noah sighed, taking a sip of stale coffee. He didn't belong to their world of bravado and command. But when he saw Blitz lying obediently in the corner, head resting on his paws, something softened in him. The animal's patience reminded him of his old beagle at home, the only friend he'd had during his parents' bitter divorce. Back outside, Rix grabbed a metal rod from near the grill, twirling it between his fingers like a toy. "Man, I can't stand that dog," he muttered. "Sits there all high and mighty, like it knows better than us." "Then teach it manners," Danner said quietly, his voice low, his grin spreading slow and dark. They stumbled toward the kennels, the metallic clang of boots echoing. Blitz lifted his head immediately, ears pricking, a soft growl rumbling in his throat. His muscles tensed, ready but restrained, because that's what Ethan had taught him. "Hey, Mutt," Rick sneered, kicking at the bars. "Where's your hero now?" He hurled a small rock that struck the gate with a metallic ping. Blitz flinched but didn't bark, only shifted, watching. Danner's grin widened. "Quiet, huh? Too well behaved for your own good." He unlatched the outer lock and stepped closer. "Sir," Rick said uncertainly, his words slurring. "If Ward finds out—" "Ward won't find out," Danner snapped. "Now lift that upper frame." The kennel's second tier was an old modular stack used for temporary storage. Danner shoved it with his boot, then pushed harder until one of the braces creaked. Blitz barked once, a sharp warning sound. Danner's eyes flashed. "Don't you dare." Noah leaned closer to his screen, heart thudding. His camera view jittered as the wind shook the mount. But he could see enough Danner's hulking figure towering over the cage, Rick's beside him, the shape of Blitz below. "Don't," he whispered to himself, helpless. Then came the crash, a sharp, metallic scream as the top frame gave way. The sound split the night. Noah flinched. His coffee spilled across the keyboard. On the screen, dust and debris blurred the image. When it cleared, Blitz lay motionless for several seconds before struggling up, one leg bent at an unnatural angle. "Enough," Rix hissed, his face pale. "He's hurt." Danner's breath came in hard bursts, half shock, half satisfaction. "Good," he muttered. "Maybe he'll learn obedience." They stumbled away, laughter forced, but their faces drained of color. Noah sat frozen for a full minute before he moved, his fingers trembling as he switched camera angles. Blitz was trying to crawl to the corner, dragging his injured leg, whimpering softly. Noah's throat tightened. He reached for the phone on his desk, but stopped. Reporting Danner meant ruin. It meant discharge, maybe worse. But watching the dog suffer in silence, that was a betrayal he couldn't bear. He clenched his fists. "Hold on, buddy," he whispered. Half an hour later, Ethan returned. The yard was quiet now, the fire pit smoldering, the party long dispersed. The metallic scent of blood hit him before he reached the kennels. "Blitz?" His voice broke the silence. A faint whine answered. Ethan's chest clenched. He dropped to his knees, hands, brushing through the darkness until they met warm fur, wet, sticky. He found Blitz curled in the corner, trembling violently. The dog's eyes met his, glassy but alive. Ethan's heart stopped. He moved fast, untying his coat, wrapping Blitz in it, lifting the heavy body into his arms with practiced gentleness. Blitz whimpered but didn't resist. The door of the veterinary clinic banged open. "Doctor." Nora Patel, wearing a gray hoodie over her scrubs, appeared, hair loose from its bun. Her sharp, dark eyes widened at the sight. "Ethan, God, what happened?" "Accident," he said hoarsely. "I think the kennel collapsed." She didn't question. Together, they laid Blitz on the table. Nora worked swiftly, hands sure, voice steady, though her jaw was tight. "Broken radius," she murmured, examining the leg. "Bruising here, ribs likely fractured. This isn't just collapse damage. Someone dropped that frame." Ethan didn't answer. His hands were clenched at his, sides, knuckles white. The sterile light made his face look carved from stone. When Blitz whimpered, Ethan moved closer, laying a hand on the dog's head. "I'm here," he said quietly. "You did good." Nora glanced up, her gaze softening. "You know I'll file the report." "I know," Ethan said, voice low. "Make it official. No speculation. Just facts." Her eyes searched his. "You're planning something." Ethan exhaled through his nose. "I'm planning to remember." When the treatment was done, and Blitz was sedated, Ethan sat beside him, his father's old words echoing in his mind. "You don't raise your voice to fight darkness. You outlast it." Through the frosted clinic window, the red beacon light from the tower blinked slowly like the heartbeat of Iron Peak itself. Somewhere inside that fortress of silence, Ethan's rage hardened into resolve. The wind over Iron Peak that morning carried a quiet bitterness, the kind that settled in a man's bones long after sunrise. Frost still clung to the gravel outside the barracks, crunching softly under Ethan Ward's boots as he crossed the compound toward the communications wing. His eyes were calm, but beneath that stillness ran the slow, heavy pulse of restrained fury. Blitz was recovering in the medical wing, his leg bound in a clean white cast, sedated and safe under Dr. Nora Patel's watch. The emptiness beside Ethan's heel made the world feel wrong, like a song missing its final note. Inside the building, fluorescent lights hummed weakly, flickering over walls painted in military gray. The smell of coffee and cold metal hung in the air. Noah Green sat alone in the corner of the monitoring office, his small frame hunched over the screens. He looked paler than usual, the dark crescents under his eyes betraying sleeplessness. His hands fidgeted with the corner of a folder, as though trying to erase what they had seen. When Ethan entered, Noah jumped, the motion sending his chair squeaking backward. "Sergeant Ward, sir, I didn't expect." Ethan raised a hand, quieting him. His voice was even, low but steady. "You saw it, didn't you?" Noah froze. His gaze darted to the camera feeds, then to the floor. I don't know what you mean, sir." Ethan stepped closer, his shadow crossing over the boy's desk. "Don't lie to me, specialist. You were watching the kennels." The words weren't a threat, but there was something in Ethan's tone, a weight, a gravity that cut through pretense. Noah swallowed hard. His freckles stood out starkly against the bloodless pallor of his face. "Sir, if I say anything, Sergeant Danner controls everything here. He'll find out. He'll ruin me. He could," Ethan interrupted softly. "He already ruined something more important." His hand clenched, then loosened. "That dog. He hurt? He's more than a partner. Blitz saved my life 3 years ago, in Syria." Noah hesitated, confusion flickering through the panic. Ethan sat down opposite him, resting his elbows on his knees. "We were deployed near Aleppo," he began, voice distant, like he was reciting a memory carved into stone. "There was an old-school supply depot. Blitz picked up the scent first, explosives buried beneath the floorboards. He alerted me. Quiet, just a paw on my boot. Then the roof went. I don't remember the sound, just the heat. When I woke up, I was half buried. He'd dug me out with his paws until they bled. That's the only reason I'm still breathing." The room went still except for the hum of the machines. Ethan leaned forward, his voice softening. "You saw what they did, Noah. That wasn't an accident. If you stay quiet, you're saying it's acceptable. You're saying what they did was just another night." Noah's throat worked as he tried to speak. He looked barely 20, fragile in a way that had nothing to do with size, the fragility of someone who had spent his life obeying to survive. His father had been a foreman, known for his fists more than his kindness. Obedience had been Noah's only shield. Now that shield felt like a cage. He looked up finally, his voice trembling. "If I give you proof, they'll know it came from me." Ethan shook his head. "No one will know. I don't need your name, just the truth." He stood and turned to leave, pausing at the door. "You want to be invisible, Noah? Then let justice speak for you." For a long time after he left, Noah sat motionless. The monitors glowed coldly against his face, replaying the endless rotation of camera angles. His fingers hovered above the keyboard. He exhaled shakily, then began typing a command string to access archived footage. The security software wasn't meant for edits, but Noah knew its weaknesses. He'd built half of it during his internship. By midnight, his desk was lit only by the glow of the progress bar crawling across the screen. Copying, 97%. His palms were slick with sweat. When the file finished, he stared at the small black USB drive in his hand. It felt heavier than it should have, a piece of plastic and metal that could crush a man's career or cleanse a conscience. He closed his fist around it, heart pounding. "Don't be a coward," he whispered to himself, the words tasting like rust. Outside, the wind howled through the compound, rattling loose sheets of tin from the storage sheds. The night seemed endless, but Noah stayed awake, listening for footsteps that never came. At 0600, Ethan woke to the faintest scrape at his door. Instinct made him reach for the combat knife under his pillow. Then he saw it, a small object lying on the floor, half hidden by the morning light seeping under the doorframe. He bent down and picked it up. The black USB drive was unmarked, clean except for a single fingerprint smudge. He turned it over once, a smile ghosting across his face, not of joy, but of grim satisfaction. "Good man," he murmured. He closed the blinds, plugged the drive into his laptop, and waited. The video opened grainy and silent, security timestamp glowing in the corner. There they were, Danner, shoulders wide as a wall, and Rix beside him, smaller, twitchy. The crash of the upper frame played out in eerie stillness, followed by Blitz's fall, his body crumpling in the corner. Ethan's hand tightened into a fist. He watched every second, forcing himself not to look away. The screen's reflection cast harsh shadows across his face, carving the anger there into something cold, methodical. When it ended, he ejected the drive and slipped it into the inner pocket of his uniform. He whispered into the quiet, "Light doesn't scream, it reveals." Moments later, a knock sounded on his door. He expected Nora, but it wasn't her. Standing in the hallway was Lieutenant Mara Voss, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp beneath the stray strands of silver hair that had escaped her bun. "Ward," she said evenly. "You're being reassigned. Temporary security detail, Eastern Perimeter. Pending review." Ethan's brow furrowed slightly. "Whose order?" "Danner's." Her gaze flicked to the door behind him, then back. "You didn't hear this from me. He's moving fast. He knows you're not letting this go." Ethan nodded once, gratitude flashing in his eyes. "Thank you, Lieutenant." As she turned to leave, she hesitated. "Whatever you're planning, be careful. Men like him always mistake silence for surrender." When she was gone, Ethan looked out through the small window. The mountains loomed in the distance, pale blue against the morning haze. He slipped the USB deeper into his pocket, the weight of it grounding him. For now, there would be no confrontation, not yet. Timing mattered more than rage. Back in the clinic, Blitz stirred in his sleep. The monitors beeped steadily, the rhythmic echo of recovery. Ethan visited briefly before his new post, resting a hand on the dog's head. "Rest, partner," he murmured. "We've got work to do." The dog's tail twitched once, as if in answer. When Ethan stepped outside, the first light of day broke through the clouds, faint but undeniable, a promise, not yet dawn, but close enough to believe in. The morning over Iron Peak was so white it hurt to look at. Snow had fallen through the night, coating every rooftop, every antenna, every empty training field in a silent frost. The air bit with the clean, metallic sharpness that only winter could bring. Soldiers moved briskly through the compound, their boots crunching in rhythm, breath-forming plumes that vanished into the cold. In the midst of that frozen order, Ethan Ward walked toward the command building, each step deliberate, each exhale steady. At his side, Blitz limped slightly, but carried himself with quiet dignity. His bandaged leg barely hindered the proud tilt of his head. His coat had regained its sheen, brushed gold under the pale light, his amber eyes fixed ahead, as if he too understood that this was no ordinary morning. Inside the command building, warmth and silence mingled uneasily. The new commanding officer, Colonel Helena Brooks, was not a woman who tolerated waste of time, of words, or of men. She was in her early 50s, tall and spare, with a narrow, sharp-featured face and iron-gray hair cropped close against her head. Her posture was perfect, her voice low and deliberate. Years ago, she had served as a combat intelligence officer in Kabul. A roadside explosion had left a scar across her left temple, a thin, white line she never concealed. It gave her an almost statuesque air, like marble cracked but not broken. She looked up from her desk as Ethan entered, her gray eyes narrowing slightly. "Sergeant Ward," she said, gesturing for him to stand at ease. "You requested an audience. Make it quick." Ethan placed a slim manila folder on the desk. "Ma'am, this is a complete report regarding Sergeant Danner's conduct during K-9 training operations. It includes veterinary assessments by Dr. Patel, my field journal, and..." He drew a small black USB drive from his pocket, recorded evidence from the compound surveillance. Helena's gaze flicked to the USB. "You understand the implications of what you're doing?" "Yes, ma'am. I also understand the cost of doing nothing." For a long moment, she studied him, his calm, his control, the faint tremor in the hand that wasn't visible to anyone but her trained eye. Then she reached for the USB, sliding it into her computer without hesitation. As the footage played, the only sound in the room was the hum of the heater. When the image of Danner appeared, his face twisted in drunken cruelty, the milkshake pouring over Blitz, the metallic strike that followed Helena's lips thinned to a razor's edge. When the video ended, she exhaled through her nose. "I've seen monsters wear better uniforms," she said quietly. Then, after a pause, "You want justice. You'll have it. But it must be done properly." Ethan nodded once. "Understood, ma'am." "Good," she said, leaning back. "General Oliver Grant arrives tomorrow for his inspection. He's heard whispers about brutality in the K9 units. If there's truth to what I've seen, he'll burn this place to the ground. You'll have your chance, Sergeant. I'll see to it that you and Blitz are on the demonstration roster. Grant." The name was legend, a decorated general in his 60s, tall, broad-shouldered, his once dark hair now silver, but his eyes still fierce with purpose. He was known for his uncompromising ethics and a strange, deep affection for dogs. It was said that he still kept the ashes of his first K9 partner in a small brass urn on his desk. For men like Danner, he was a storm waiting to happen. The next day dawned cold and pale. The open field had been transformed into a stage of order, banners snapping in the wind, handlers and dogs aligned in crisp rows. Danner stood near the front, jaw set, uniform immaculate, eyes shadowed with sleepless rage. Rix hovered behind him, face pale, lips pressed thin. They both knew something was coming, but didn't yet see the full shape of it. At precisely 0900, the motorcade arrived. General Grant stepped out first, his heavy coat dusted with snow. His face was cut from the same stone as the mountains around them, hard, weathered, but alive with quiet intelligence. Colonel Brooks greeted him formally, her tone crisp but respectful. "Let's see what you've been teaching them, Colonel," Grant said, scanning the lineup. "Actions speak louder than policy." Danner stepped forward, his voice loud, brimming with practiced confidence. "General, we'll begin with high-intensity obedience control. My K9 will demonstrate full submission and aggression response on command." Grant nodded curtly. "Proceed." Danner's Malinois, a slender male named Rex, was trembling even before the first command. Danner barked orders sharp, guttural, almost violent. The dog lunged, then faltered, ears flat, tail low. When Danner shouted again, the animal snapped out of fear rather than focus, tearing at the training sleeve with desperation. The scene was mechanical, frantic power, without purpose. Grant's expression darkened. "That's not discipline," he said quietly to Brooks. "That's terror." Brooks didn't answer. She simply lifted her chin. "Perhaps you'd prefer to see the alternative, sir." Her signal was small but unmistakable. From the edge of the field, Ethan stepped forward, Blitz walking freely beside him, no leash, no command collar, just quiet synchronization. Murmurs rippled through the ranks. Even Grant turned slightly, interest flickering across his features. Ethan stopped midfield and knelt, his gloved hand resting lightly on Blitz's shoulder. "Ready?" he whispered. The dog's ears perked, tail lowering slightly in focus. Then, without a word spoken, Blitz moved. He wove through a maze of obstacles, barrels, crates, and false scent trails, each motion fluid, deliberate, silent. When he found the hidden target, he didn't bark. He sat, perfectly still, eyes fixed on the scent source. The stillness spread through the watching crowd like a held breath. Grant's voice broke it, low and impressed. "Remarkable. No shouting, no violence, just trust." Ethan rose, meeting his gaze. "Yes, sir. The silent light method. It's built on cooperation, not submission. Grant was about to respond when a flicker appeared on the large monitor behind them, the feed meant to display training metrics. Instead, the screen froze, then shifted. The timestamp appeared first, followed by grainy footage from the security camera, Noah Green's recovered file. Gasps rippled through the ranks as the images played. Danner, pouring the milkshake, Blitz's terrified recoil, the strike, the fall. Every soldier on the field stood rigid, the sound of the wind, now the only noise. Rick stumbled back, face ashen. Danner's lips parted, but no words came. Grant turned slowly, his expression carved in granite. Who authorized this training? Danner swallowed hard. Sir, it was a misunderstanding. Silence. Grant's tone cut like a blade. He looked to Brooks. Colonel? She gave a crisp nod. Military police. 2 MPs in heavy coats strode forward. One seized Rick's, the other Danner. Neither resisted. The snow under their boots was marked with deep, black prints as they were led away. Grant turned to Ethan. Your report was thorough, Sergeant Ward. You and your partner just saved this program. Ethan inclined his head slightly. We only showed the truth, sir. The general's stern face softened just slightly. The truth, he said, glancing at Blitz, is the hardest thing to hide in the snow. As the wind picked up, the snow swirled around them, turning the field into a white haze. Blitz sat beside Ethan, chest rising and falling steadily, his eyes locked on his handler. The silence between them spoke louder than any victory. Cry the quiet triumph of light, revealed in the cold. The thaw began quietly. The snow that had buried Iron Peak for months was melting, revealing patches of dark soil and flattened grass beneath the morning sun. The air was still cold, but no longer cruel. A faint mist rose from the training field, carrying with it the scent of steel, wet earth, and something new hope. The compound, once ruled by barks of fear and the crack of leather whips, now echoed with the rhythmic panting of dogs running freely and the calm voices of handlers calling not commands, but names. It had been 7 days since the arrest. The memory of that morning, the sight of Danner and Ricks being marched out under the eyes of the entire unit, still lingered like a scar across the compound. But scars could heal, and Iron Peak was healing. The cruel old signs painted with slogans like "Discipline through pain" had been removed, replaced by a simple banner near the entrance, handwritten by one of the handlers. Trust is the strongest leash. Ethan Ward walked across the field in his new uniform. The silver insignia on his chest caught the sunlight, marking his recent promotion, Chief Handler, Iron Peak K-9 Division. He moved with the same quiet discipline as before, his boots pressing neat prints into the half-melted snow. Blitz walked beside him, recovered but slower, his once bandaged leg now strong enough to bear his weight. His coat shimmered gold and sable, and his eyes glowed with intelligence that no rank could ever teach. "Attention!" one of the handlers called out, more out of respect than formality. The line of men and women straightened instinctively as Ethan approached. Among them were faces once hardened by fear, now softened, open, uncertain but willing. Ethan stopped at the center of the yard, letting his gaze sweep over the team. "At ease," he said. His voice carried through the crisp air, calm and firm. "We are not here to start over. We are here to continue, but better." He looked toward the kennels. For too long, this place mistook obedience for loyalty. It mistook silence for submission. That ends now. He paused, lowering his voice. "We don't teach them to obey. We teach them to trust." The handlers exchanged looks, some doubtful, some moved. A woman at the back, Sergeant Lila Cortez, a young trainer with sun-browned skin and dark curls tied beneath her cap, raised a tentative hand. She was small but sharp-eyed, her voice steady, though cautious. "Sir, permission to speak?" Ethan nodded. She hesitated before asking, "How do we rebuild trust with them?" "After what's been done." Ethan smiled faintly. "The same way you rebuild trust with anyone you've hurt. You stop shouting. You start listening." He gestured toward Blitz. "You start with 1." Lila stepped forward, kneeling slowly in front of Blitz. The dog tilted his head, studying her with wary curiosity. She extended a gloved hand, palm open. "Hey there, soldier," she murmured. Blitz sniffed once, then leaned forward, brushing his muzzle against her hand. The moment was small, but powerful. Around the field, one by one, the other handlers began to kneel beside their dogs, some whispering softly, others simply standing in silence, learning the language of patience for the first time. From the edge of the field, Colonel Helena Brooks watched, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Yet when she turned slightly toward Dr. Nora Patel, who stood beside her in her white coat, there was a faint glimmer in her eyes. "It's working," Helena said quietly. Nora smiled, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. "It always works, ma'am. You just have to give the right people the leash." Across the field, Lieutenant Mara Voss was walking with a clipboard, jotting notes but occasionally watching Ethan with a thoughtful smile. She was less severe than before, her usual precision softened by respect. She'd seen men break under command, and others rise from it. Ethan, she decided, belonged to the latter. "Chief Ward," she called out. "General Grant sent his commendation. He's requesting a full behavioral progress report in 30 days. Seems he wants Iron Peak to become the standard model for all K-9 divisions." Ethan nodded once, hiding the surprise in his chest. "Then, let's give him something worth studying." He turned to the team again. "From today, the old drills are gone. We replace them with something better. Each morning begins with what I call the silent walk. You and your partner move together, without words. No orders, no leash, no punishment, just understanding." There were murmurs among the handlers, but no objections. One of them, a burly, red-haired veteran named Corporal Dane Miller, who once trained under Danner, scratched the back of his neck and muttered, "Never thought I'd see the day we treat dogs better than people." Ethan looked at him, expression calm. "Maybe that's how we'll start treating people better, too." Laughter rippled gently through the group, not mocking, but genuine. Hours later, as the training began, the field came alive in a way it never had before. The barking was no longer desperate, it was joyous. Blitz led the example runs, his energy contagious even among the younger dogs. Lila's Labrador, a nervous black pup named Mako, hesitated at first but followed Blitz's cues. By the end of the session, he was bounding through the snow with confidence. Ethan stood at the edge of the field, arms crossed, watching. The world looked different now, the same fences, the same barracks, but brighter somehow. Maybe it was just the reflection of light on melting snow, or maybe it was something deeper, the feeling that Iron Peak was alive again. Helena approached from behind, her boots crunching lightly. "You've done well, Ward," she said. "This place was a wound. You've turned it into a heartbeat." Ethan shook his head, modestly. "It wasn't me, ma'am. It was them, all of them." She smiled faintly. "Humility looks good on you, Sergeant." Then, lowering her voice, "The General wants to keep you here permanently, to rebuild every K-9 program in the Western Command under this method." Ethan's jaw tightened, not from pride, but from a quiet realization of what that meant, a legacy. "Then we'll call it what it is," he said softly. "Silent light." When the day ended, the sun dipped low behind the peaks, painting the snow in hues of gold and rose. The handlers gathered their dogs and lined up in a half circle. Blitz sat at the front, tail sweeping the ground. Ethan stepped forward, his voice calm but resonant against the mountains. "Every command we give echoes somewhere inside them, and every kindness echoes louder. Remember that." He crouched beside Blitz, resting his hand gently on the dog's head. Blitz leaned into the touch, his eyes half closed, content. Around them, the field shimmered with the reflected light of the setting sun. It wasn't triumph that filled Ethan's chest. It was peace. The age of brutality had ended. What remained was trust, carved in silence and sealed in snow. In the quiet light of dawn, Ethan understood what his father had always meant, that true strength is not born from power or control, but from the grace to trust and to love without condition. The story of Silent Light is not just about soldiers and dogs. It's about the miracle that happens when compassion replaces fear, when patience becomes courage, and when faith guides our hands instead of anger. In every small act of kindness, in every moment we choose understanding over judgment, we create a reflection of God's quiet miracle in our own lives. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that light always finds its way through the coldest night. Leave a comment, subscribe to our channel, and join us in spreading stories of hope, courage, and redemption. May God bless you and your loved ones, and may His gentle light guard your heart wherever you go.